There are moments in life, quiet, painful moments, when no matter how much effort you pour into a relationship, a friendship, a workplace, or a connection, the person on the other side simply does not see you. They treat you as a given. They take your presence for granted. They minimize your worth as though it costs them nothing. And the tragedy isn't just the pain of being unseen, it's the confusion that follows. You ask yourself, what am I doing wrong? Why isn't this enough? What do I need to prove? Here is the answer, and I want you to hear it clearly. You don't need to prove anything. The wound isn't a reflection of your value. It is a mirror of their blindness. But awareness alone doesn't heal us. And that is exactly why we're here today, not to plan revenge, not to manipulate the situation, not to force someone to finally acknowledge what they've been refusing to see. We're here to do something far more powerful, far more lasting, and far more dignified, to take back ownership of your own life, to align with your deepest self, and to become so whole, so centered, so unshakable that no one's dismissal can ever reach the core of you again. This is not a motivational speech about becoming cold or detached. It is a call toward integration, toward sovereignty, toward the kind of quiet, radiant strength that doesn't need an audience to exist. Let us begin. 1. The power of strategic silence. We live in a world that rewards loudness. Defend yourself. Speak up. Explain your position. And there are absolutely times when that is the right thing to do. But there is another kind of power, one that is far more ancient, far more stoic, far more misunderstood, and it is the power of deliberate, intentional silence. When someone dismisses you, ignores you, or treats you as though your presence is optional, your first instinct might be to explain yourself, to reach out, to remind them of your worth. This instinct comes from a good place. It comes from love, from hope, from the human need to be seen. But here's what happens when you follow that instinct with someone who is not ready to receive you. You hand them the narrative. You become the one who is chasing, and in doing so, you unknowingly confirm the very dynamic they set up, that your value is contingent on their acknowledgement. Silence, used consciously, reverses this entirely. The Stoics understood something profound about this. Marcus Aurelius, Roman emperor and one of history's great philosophers, wrote extensively in his private journals the meditations about the discipline of not reacting to every provocation. He didn't practice silence because he was weak. He practiced it because he understood that true strength is not the ability to respond, it is the ability to choose when to respond and when to simply withdraw into your own sovereignty. When you go quiet, not out of passive aggression, not as a manipulation tactic, but as a genuine act of self-preservation and self-respect, something remarkable happens. The other person is left alone with the story they've been telling themselves about you, and without your emotional availability to keep confirming or reacting to that story, cracks begin to form. Doubt seeps in. Questions arise. Why have they stopped reaching? Why are they no longer explaining themselves? Why do they seem unreachable? Your silence becomes the loudest message you've ever sent. Not because you engineered it to be, but because authenticity always speaks louder than performance. So, the next time someone treats you as though you are easily replaceable, as though your effort is invisible, as though your presence means nothing, resist the urge to argue your case. Instead, withdraw into your own quiet dignity. Let them sit with what they are losing. Let them feel the absence of something they were too careless to appreciate. Silence is not surrender. Silence is mastery. 2. Stop explaining yourself to people who have already decided not to understand you. This may be one of the most liberating ideas you carry with you after today. You are not obligated to explain yourself to everyone. We develop this habit early in life, the need to justify our choices, defend our feelings, articulate our reasons, and it makes sense in certain contexts. Communication is vital. Understanding matters. But there is a crucial distinction between communication that builds bridges and explanation that only deepens your dependence on someone else's approval. When you over-explain to someone who has already made up their mind about you, you are not building a bridge. You are performing, and every performance is a bid for validation, a quiet confession that says, your opinion of me matters more than my own. Marcus Aurelius wrote something that has stayed with philosophers for centuries. Waste no more time arguing what a good person should be one. In essence, stop seeking permission to be who you are. Stop auditing yourself through someone else's eyes. This is harder than it sounds, because often the people we most desperately want to understand us are the ones we love: partners, parents, old friends, colleagues we respected. and the longing to be understood by them is real and legitimate. But there's a difference between the longing and the strategy. The longing is human, but explaining yourself endlessly to someone who refuses to truly listen is not a path to understanding. It is a path to exhaustion. When you stop explaining yourself to those who have chosen not to understand you, something shifts. You stop leaking your energy into a void. You reclaim the hours and the emotional bandwidth that were being consumed by justification. And the message you send, not in words, but in posture, in presence, in the quiet steadiness of someone who no longer needs approval, is one of the most powerful messages you can ever transmit. I don't need your validation to know who I am. That message will do more to command respect than any explanation ever could. 3. Focus on your purpose and integrate with your own center. Carl Jung, the great Swiss psychologist, described a process he called individuation, the lifelong journey of becoming fully, authentically yourself. Not who your parents needed you to be, not who society rewards, not who your relationship demands, but who you actually are, at the deepest level of your being. Jung believed that when we neglect this process, when we organize our lives around what others think of us, around earning approval, around proving worth to people who withhold it, we lose ourselves. We become fragments. We become reactive. We become defined by the gap between who we are and who we're trying to convince others we are. And here's the painful truth. As long as you are orienting your life around the attention or validation of someone who undervalues you, you are handing that person the map to your inner world. You are letting them determine your emotional weather. You are living in their orbit. The antidote is not indifference. The antidote is redirection. What are you here to do? What lights you up with a kind of quiet fire that has nothing to do with who's watching? What are the projects, the creative pursuits, the physical practices, the intellectual questions, the relationships with people who genuinely see you, that make you feel most alive? Go there. Go there with everything you have, because nothing, and I mean nothing, is more disorienting to someone who underestimated you than watching you flourish without them. When they see that your joy doesn't require their presence, when they observe that your momentum doesn't depend on their approval, when they realize, finally and too late, that what they dismissed as ordinary was actually extraordinary, and that it's still growing, still blooming, with or without their recognition, your ascent is the answer. Not to them, to yourself, but they will feel it all the same. 4. Draw your lines without guilt and learn to say no. People who undervalue us rarely do so in a vacuum. Usually, there is a history, a pattern in which we allowed it, not because we're weak, not because we're foolish, but because most of us were never taught that boundaries are an act of love, not just toward others, but toward ourselves. Boundaries are not walls. Boundaries are not punishment. Boundaries are simply the honest declaration of what you will and will not accept, and they are one of the most powerful tools available to any person who wants to live with integrity. Here's what often happens without them. The person who dismisses us gradually learns, through our repeated tolerance, that dismissal is safe, that they can treat us carelessly and there will be no consequence, that our patience is infinite and our presence is guaranteed. And so the pattern deepens, because we taught it. When you begin to draw clear lines, not with aggression, not with ultimatums, born from frustration, but with calm, confident certainty, the dynamic shifts. Not because you've issued a threat, but because you've communicated something new. I value myself enough to protect what I allow into my space. You don't owe anyone an elaborate justification for your boundaries. That doesn't work for me as a complete sentence. I'm not available for that kind of interaction. Requires no footnotes. And here is the beautiful paradox of genuine boundaries. The right people will respect them, and in doing so, the relationship will deepen. The wrong people will resist them, and in doing so, they will reveal exactly who they are and how much they truly value you. Either way, you win. Either the relationship grows healthier, or you gain clarity about why it needed to end. Saying no, calmly, without apology, without lengthy explanation, is one of the most loving things you can do for yourself, and ultimately, even for the other person. Who deserves to be in relationship with someone who is fully present by choice, not by inability to leave. 5. Become emotionally self-sufficient. We arrive now at the deepest layer, the one that everything else rests upon. Epictetus, who was born a slave and became one of history's most revered philosophers, understood something about freedom that most people born into comfort never grasp. Freedom is not an external condition, it is an internal one. "Seek not that the things which happen should happen as you wish," he wrote, "but wish the things which happen to be as they are, and you will have a tranquil flow of life." What he was describing as a form of radical self-sufficiency, the recognition that your peace, your sense of worth, cannot depend on what any other person chooses to give you or withhold from you. Not because other people don't matter, not because love and connection aren't real and vital, but because to build your inner life on the foundation of someone else's attention is to build on sand. Emotional self-sufficiency doesn't mean you stop wanting love or connection. It means that your sense of wholeness doesn't collapse when those things are withheld. It means you can sit with your own company and find it rich. It means you can move through the world, not from a place of lack, always seeking, always needing, always hoping someone will finally fill the void, but from a place of abundance, from fullness, from a self that is already complete. When you operate from this place, something remarkable happens to the dynamic with people who undervalue you. They lose their leverage, because their leverage was always your need for their approval, their affection, their acknowledgement. When that need dissolves, when you genuinely no longer require their validation to feel okay, they are left without the currency they've been using to keep you in position. This is not a manipulation tactic. This is genuine liberation, and it takes time. It takes practice. It takes, sometimes, the help of good therapy, honest friends, meaningful work, spiritual practice, or physical disciplines that reconnect you with your own body and your own vitality. But every step in this direction is a step toward a version of yourself that no dismissal, no indifference, no subtle cruelty can destabilize. Because when you are whole within yourself, truly whole, not performing wholeness but living it, the absence of someone else's appreciation is not a loss you carry. It is simply information, and you are free to act on it, calmly and completely, from a place of self-respect. So here is where we arrive. At the end of this conversation, and the beginning of a different way of living, you may be thinking of someone right now, someone whose dismissal has cost you more than you wanted to admit, someone whose carelessness left marks, someone who should have seen you and chose, for their own complicated reasons, not to. I want you to know, their blindness is not your verdict. The fact that they could not see your worth does not mean your worth isn't real. It means their vision was limited. And you cannot spend your one irreplaceable life waiting for someone to finally look up. The path forward is not revenge. It is not manipulation. It is not a campaign to make them regret what they had. It is something quieter and more radical. It is the daily, deliberate practice of choosing yourself. Choosing your silence when silence is wisdom. Choosing your focus when focus is power. Choosing your boundaries when boundaries are love. Choosing your wholeness when the world around you would rather you stayed broken and available. You are not a supporting character in someone else's story. You are the author of your own. And the most extraordinary plot twist you can write is this: to become, slowly and surely and without fanfare, a person so aligned with their own truth, so deeply rooted in their own value, so genuinely free from the need for external validation, that the people who once overlooked you are left wondering, quietly and privately, how they could have been so blind, not because you wanted them to wonder, but because you were too busy becoming. Begin now. Begin quietly. Begin with one choice, today, that belongs entirely to you. That is where your unshakable self starts.